We are live talking Denver Broncos football on the Ourlads Football Network here on the Ourlads Football YouTube channel. And talking Denver Broncos football means that we're going to talk with Chris Tomasson of the Denver Gazette, who was with us to preview the offseason just a few months ago. The offseason is not over yet, Chris, but the draft is. A lot of free agency is. So so far, how are things going as far as the fans are concerned with Denver this offseason?
Well, I think, first of all, thanks for having me. I think most of all, the fans were pleased with the Broncos draft. The Broncos say they're pleased, but when have you ever heard a team say after a draft, didn't work out this year for us? Yeah. So, but Bo Nix has created some excitement. I mean, that's the main thing that's going on here in Denver is the battle at quarterback. And what's kind of unusual about it is that it's a three-way battle. You don't usually see three-way battles to be the starter. You have Bo Nix, who's a rookie. You have Jarrett Stidham, who is, quote, the incumbent, unquote, if you can call him that. He started the last two games last year when they benched and then eventually released Russell Wilson. And then last month they acquired Zach Wilson from the New York Jets, the number 2 pick in the 2021 draft. And Sean Payton is hopeful he can resurrect his career. And if he can, then I guess you have a nice problem. You got another serious competitor to start this coming season.
Yeah, I think it should be a lot of fun from my perspective, being a Jet fan, because I've often said that I think part of the problem with Zach was they did not get him prepared properly coaching wise. And now there's not going to be that excuse. Plus, he's not a rookie anymore. So this is going to be his golden opportunity. And I believe that he should, in my opinion, I think he should be the favorite to win the job because he doesn't start on opening day. That's a bad sign for Zach Wilson. I'm sure the fans are rooting for Bo Nix, but how have they taken to Zach? I know he's from kind of the area. I know he grew up about within 500 miles of Denver. So is he getting support?
Well, he said that the Broncos were the team that he followed when he grew up in Utah, and he said the only NFL game he's ever seen when he wasn't on an NFL roster was a preseason game once when he was growing up. Watching the Broncos in Denver, but I don't know if there's any faction that's like openly rooting for him yet. I mean, he was so mediocre with the Jets. I think people are going to have to see him do something, at least in a preseason game before they believe that he potentially has come close to turning the corner. But I mean, Bo Nix is their future. I mean, what happens if, Zach Wilson, emerges and it looks like he's the guy and he's an impending free agent next year. So
good problem to have.
Yeah. Well, it's not like they can hold on to him and then someone else can just swoop in and grab him. And then maybe you're left with Bo Nix if in fact Wilson wasn't the starter and Nix. So, I mean, Nix is their long-term future, and Zach Wilson would have to totally outplay Nix to be the starter. If it's close, Nix gets the nod.
Yeah, well, I'll be rooting for him too. I just picked him up in my dynasty rookie draft, so he's my quarterback of the future as well. So, matter of fact, I have Zach as one of my other 5 quarterbacks, so I'm in a good position. Whoever wins the job might be one of my starting quarterbacks this year. If not, better off sitting the bench on my team. All right, so let's talk more about the Denver Broncos and the draft. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody that the Ourlads draft guide is still available. Here it is. And thanks to my conversation with Chris a few months back, I had the opportunity to preview the Denver draft, and a lot of that was in here in this guide, so you can check it out. Of course, the main reason to look at it now more than anything for Denver fans, with the draft picks that Denver accumulated here, they had a total of 7 draft picks, and out of the 7 draft picks, I believe all of them, the scouting reports, are in this draft guide. So all 7 So this is still even though the draft is over, still a good opportunity for you to check out the scouting reports if you're a Denver fan, or if you're just a football fan. It's not too late. And also, don't forget the draft review guide, which is the reason I'm having this conversation with Kris right now, to pump him with information for my articles, for my story on the Denver Broncos and the draft review process. This is last year's draft, but cover. But that's coming out in about a month at ourlads.com. And here on the channel, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Let's get right to it, starting with Bo Nix. And what have you noticed, or just talking even to the coaching staff, GM, and so forth, what is it that you think that they like about him the most?
Well, they like his accuracy, obviously, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, he's drawn comparisons to Drew Brees. Brees holds the NFL record for completion percentage in a season, and Bo Nix holds the NCAA record last season, 77.4% of his passes completed. They like his accuracy. They like his ability to get the ball out quickly. I mean, he didn't take many sacks in college, and they like his maturity. I mean, sometimes these quarterbacks and draftees coming out of only played a couple of years, and they're in college 3 years and they bolt. He was in college 5 years with both Auburn and Oregon, and was a regular starter for 5 seasons. I believe he holds the all-time college record, like 61 games played, I believe. Yes. So they like his maturity from that aspect, and the one thing you maybe heard from scouts was about throwing the deep ball. Some people questioned his arm, but the Broncos don't seem to have any problem with that. And
he has the scouting report on his deep pass. He has a nice deep ball. So yeah, I'm sure everybody's got an opinion.
Yeah, and I talked to Dan Lanning, his college coach, a few weeks ago, and he shrugged that off and said, he was top notch throwing the deep ball at Oregon. And he even threw out the name of Tom Brady, saying, well, he didn't really throw deep, and he turned out okay. And then I looked up Brady, and I think in NFL history, in terms of average yards per completion, Brady ranks like 170th or something crazy like that. Yeah. Obviously he's much better in yards per attempt because he had a very high completion percentage, but here's the all-time NFL passing leader, and he's 170 in yards per completion with the length of his completions. So it's going to be get the ball out quick and a short passing game.
And that's exactly what he did with Denver. I know one of the knocks was the fact that it was almost too quarterback friendly, and there was a lot of quick passes, and you didn't really have to think too much, or you didn't have to put it in a tight window too often. But still, it doesn't mean he's not accurate, because he is. And what is also and what also helps, you talk about just his overall makeup, having a dad as a very successful high school football coach. That's a big help. I mean, just imagine growing up, you're a young kid, and your father, who you look up to, is this like genius X's and O's coach for high school football. And that's what you learn as a young kid. It's got to be a major help for you.
Yeah, his father, Patrick Nix, was a former quarterback at Auburn. Very solid quarterback. Wasn't an NFL-type prospect guy, but obviously played the position at a high level in college. And he was his coach growing up. And then Bo Nix started following in his footsteps at Auburn. He got off to a glorious start, if you recall.
Oh, yeah.
Actually beat Oregon, of all teams, on last-second pass when he was a true freshman in his first game. But eventually it didn't work out in Auburn, and he made the controversial decision to transfer to Oregon, and that elevated him even more.
Absolutely. Best thing he ever did. That's why there's a lot of reasons to dislike the transfer portal in college football, but it's still more often than not is the best thing for these kids, because it gives players like Bo Nix an opportunity to go somewhere else, different coaching staff, and because nobody would have imagined Bo Nix would have been a first-round draft pick when he was with Auburn, and look at him now. Okay, let's stick with the offense, and got to talk about the second offensive player that the Broncos chose, which happened to be his big teammate there at Oregon, wide receiver Troy Franklin. And they traded up to get him. So I wonder how much of the fact that, hey, here's a kid that we like, we need to receive another receiver. He's just as talented, or maybe, give or take, maybe a few metric points as some of these other kids that are in that zone that we're looking to draft. But he played with Bo Nix. I mean, this has got to mean something. I'm sure that had something to do with it.
Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, after the second day of the draft and heading into the fourth round, the Broncos, like all teams, regrouped, and they kind of looked at their board, and it's like, hey, Troy Franklin, he's still out there. Some people thought he might go as high as the second round. And they had gotten a good look at him in March when they went and had a private workout with Bo Nix, and he caught passes from Nix, and they had talked to him then. So they got a good look at him then. And also that Friday, day 2 of the draft, which was before even the second and third rounds, they had lunch with Bo Nix, and they discussed Troy Franklin. So at that point, I don't know if they were thinking about taking him in the third round. They didn't have a second round pick, but they went with Jonah Elliss as their third round guy. And then lo and behold, he was still available, and they quickly reached a deal in which they traded up to the number 2 pick in the fourth round on that Saturday, April 27th, and took Troy Franklin.
Yeah, so that's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Just taking a look at the Ourlads.com depth chart for the Denver Broncos here on the screen. So we did talk about Denver needing to replenish the receivers, of course, the Judy trade and so forth. They've had injuries there as well. Mims, they drafted in the second round last year, so he's still somebody I'm sure they're high on. But besides that, I mean, we talked off the air about Sutton as like a holdout at this point. We'll see when he comes back. His contract's up next year. This was definitely an important add-on, and throw in the fact that they used a 7th round draft pick on Devaughn Vele. Maybe more of a possession type, at the very least, should be able to help in the return game. This is going to be a good opportunity for Troy Franklin, isn't it? Because that depth chart looks like it's wide open for him.
Yeah, you touched upon Courtland Sutton. He hasn't shown up for Broncos spring drills yet, voluntary, of course, but he reportedly is seeking a new contract. He's got 1 year left, due to make $13 million, but only $2 million of it are guaranteed. So we'll find out how serious his staying away is come mandatory minicamp in 2 weeks, because if he doesn't show up for that, he'll get fined. But the bottom line is the Broncos have been beefing up their receiving core while Mr. Sutton has been staying away. They lost, of course, Jerry Jeudy, who they traded to Cleveland, but they replaced him with Josh Reynolds, who was a decent free agent signing late of Detroit. And then you touched upon the 2 guys they drafted, obviously, Troy Vaughn and Troy Franklin and Devaughn, taking him in the 7th round. He was a pleasant surprise at the rookie minicamp a couple weeks ago. And don't forget also that they get Tim Patrick back after he missed the past 2 seasons due to injury. So there's going to be a lot of competition in that wide receiver room. And it would seem to me to think that it would be in Courtland Sutton's best interest to show up and prove that, he's the best of the lot, because if he isn't, why are they going to pay him $13 million?
And Bo Nix, or whoever that quarterback is going to need someone like Courtland Sutton, no question about it, in that offense. So we'll see how that all works out. All right. And so we mentioned Vele, and just quickly, I know he's going to be 26 this season. That's why another reason he's drafted in the 7th round. But his numbers the last couple of years were okay. I mean, solid numbers. Again, he's got punt return experience. So, and you said he looked pretty good in camp. I know it's no jersey. I know it's all jerseys, but that's okay. They'll put the big stuff on soon enough. But you think he has a chance to make this team, especially since he's somebody that could help in the return game?
Yeah, I think he does. They like his ability to. He's got a big body, 6'4" type frame. They like his ability to go up and get balls and that kind of thing. So, yeah, the competition's going to be tremendous. They also have Jalen Virgil, who returns after missing last season due to injury, and he showed some flashes as a rookie 2 years ago. He's might be a long shot to make the team due to their depth. And little Jordan Humphrey made the team last year, but he might be hard pressed to make it again this year. And don't forget Brandon Johnson, who had some moments last year, including catching that alley-oop ball in week 2 in the final play against Washington. So, yeah, the competition for receiver is going to be quite stiff.
By the way, Mims being such a, he's a plus as a return guy, and with the new rules, do you think the strategy is going to be, well, again, if Vele does a good enough job and makes the team, we'll put Mims and Vele out there and hey, go at it? Is that like the best case scenario, is that they're both back there?
Well, they also have Tremon Smith, who's a cornerback, and he was a pretty good kickoff returner a couple of years ago, had a touchdown return for Houston. They signed him as a free agent last March, and there was a lot of speculation he might end up being their primary kickoff returner. Then they ended up drafting Marvin Mims. But, yeah, there's going to be a lot of competition, and obviously Mims is going to be one of the guys, but the other spot is pretty much open, and teams are going to kind of also try to figure out what kind of guys you want back there, as a second type guy with the new rules, because nobody knows what to expect. But it's good you brought up Mims, because I didn't expand upon him as a receiver. I mean, he certainly had his moments as a receiver last year, and they're expecting him, and they're hoping that he takes a big leap this year. I mean, it was kind of strange how he started out so well last season and then never saw the ball for weeks on end. So he's another guy that's going to certainly contend to be one of the top 3 receivers, and probably is expected to be one of the top 3 receivers this year.
All right. Again, on offense, couple more because the team added, as far as the total number of picks, they added 5 on offense. And let's continue with running back Audric Estime, because I like this kid. I'm like more of a traditional downhill physical running game kind of guy, and that's exactly what Estime could bring to this team. Now, of course, you got Javonte Williams. Everybody knows that, but Estime looks like the perfect kind of running back to get drafted where he was later in the draft. Really good players at the running back position are taken later in the draft all the time. You look at his production. You look at the fact that worst case scenario, he could be really good for you, short yardage, goal line, that kind of stuff. Plus, he's a very capable receiver. They must have been pretty happy to get him in round 5.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They thought that he was going to go earlier in the draft, much like they thought Franklin was. But after the quarterback battle, the battle at running back has the most eyes upon it, because they have a couple of guys you touched upon, Javonte Williams, who had a serious knee injury October 2022, including an ACL. And he came back last season, played the full season, had some moments, especially early on, but late in the season, it was a struggle for him. I mean, he was having numerous games where he didn't even average 3 yards a carry. So Sean Payton has said that, guys are usually better 2 years after the ACL. We'll see if that's the case with him, but he doesn't have any guaranteed money left in his contract. And if he doesn't look any better than he did late last season, he could be gone. And then Samaje Perine is another guy who could be expendable as well. He doesn't have any guaranteed money on his contract left, and he's in the final year, especially since Estime is a kind of similar physical back to him.
Yep.
And don't forget also that they drafted Blake Watson, they signed Blake Watson as an undrafted free agent. Most people thought he would be a 6th or 7th round pick out of Memphis, and He's a guy who was a 1,000-yard rusher, also can catch the ball. He'll be in the competition. And then you still have Jaleel McLaughlin, who had his moments after being an undrafted guy last year. So tremendous competition there will be in the running back room.
Yeah, overall, just taking a look at those two skill positions, it looks like it's a lot deeper now. That's what you're looking for as a coach. Quarterback competition, wide receiver, running back. I know they didn't draft a tight end, but while we're on it, is this still the hope? I know Troutman and Peyton have this relationship, but there's a lot of hope that Dulcich can stay healthy and be the guy.
Well, Dulcich did not participate last week in OTA's practice. And so, the media last Thursday was the first practice they'd seen. So that was one of the big surprises that he wasn't out there. But Sean Payton said, hey, you're going to see him sooner than later. It's not a case of where we're waiting until training camp. He's been continuously bogged down by hamstring injuries. He also had a foot injury late last season, but it seems kind of strange that he still hasn't recovered yet to the fact that he was out there in the practice field to start OTAs. And you mentioned Troutman, but a guy that Peyton was raving about last week was Lucas Krull. He was a practice squad type guy, both in New Orleans in 2022 and most of last season. They signed him to the 53-man roster late in the season. He's a big, rangy type guy, and Peyton's been raving about him since late last season. I mean, he was raving about him when he had 0 career catches. So,
Interesting.
It's going to be interesting to see if he can meet the Sean Payton hype.
Is that the kid from Pitt, Krull?
I'll grab my. I should know where he went. I'll grab my roster while we're talking here.
Okay. I just thought that was because I remember scouting him last year.
Right. He's out of Pittsburgh. Yep. You are 100% correct.
Okay. So,
he was kind of a guy who was an afterthought on the practice squad last year, and then all of a sudden he got some elevations, and then they threw the ball to him in the waning seconds of the Houston game when they had a chance to extend their 5-game winning streak, and it was intercepted, but it was a bad pass from Russell Wilson. But still, everybody was wondering why in the world they're throwing the ball to Lucas Krull in such a key moment. But that's because Sean Payton loves the guy.
Interesting. Okay. And again, we're going to talk more about how the rest of the summer goes and into training camp when Chris and I talk again before the season begins to preview the season for Denver. So don't forget to subscribe here on Ourlads, especially if you're a Broncos fan, making sure that we're going to cover every team, including Denver, and preview their season. And we'll have a lot more time to get feedback from Chris once these next couple of months are through. Okay, one more on offense, and that was the interior lineman from South Carolina. This kid played at Yale for about 5 years. Moved up, graduated, you can say, to the SEC last year. Apparently did a pretty good job. And he was the first team All-Ivy when he left Yale. So that's what you want to see. And he's got the ability to play multiple positions along the line. He played center in college, but he's a big guy. So you don't see many 6'5", 318 dudes playing center. So I'm sure it's going to be interesting to see where he fits. And at the very least, he's got center experience. I know he's only a 7th-round draft pick, but is this the kind of kid that can make the team?
You're talking about Nick?
Yes.
Take a stab at pronouncing his last name, please.
Okay, let's see. Gargiulo?
Close enough. We asked him on the conference call how to pronounce it, but I'll have to review that tape one more time. I don't want to botch it too much, but he's a project. I mean, they called after he was drafted. They called him a guard. That's what they're calling him on the roster. And he was a guy next to last pick in the draft, the runner-up for Mr. Irrelevant. I suppose if Mr. Irrelevant can't fulfill his duties, he will step in. He was a guy that they selected, but interestingly, they signed an undrafted guy, a tackle, Frank Crum, who was probably a higher out of Wyoming. He was probably a higher rated offensive lineman. So they got him as an undrafted free agent. So he's a guy that they'll take a look at. And yeah, it'll be a battle for him to make the team. And if not, he might be a practice squad guy, but I don't see that he's contributing in 2024.
Yeah, you told me about the fact that they do like, speaking of 7th round center prospects, they like the kid that they drafted last year in the 7th round, Forsythe. So interesting. Hopefully they'll get lucky again, but Forsythe is someone to keep an eye on too in camp.
Yeah, there's 3 competitors for the starting center job vacated by Lloyd Cushenberry signing with Tennessee. Alex Forsythe, who interestingly in 2022 was Bo Nix's center at Oregon. So there's another tie in there. He's obviously got a rapport with Nix from that season. And then you got Luke Wattenberg, who was a later round draft pick in 2022. But on paper, you would have to think Sam Mustipher would be the leading candidate. I mean, he was Chicago's regular starting center for a couple of years before he went to Baltimore last year and only started 2 games. So you'd think on paper he's the leading candidate. But then again, I mean, they've seen Forsythe in practice, so they like him. So we'll see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I'm sure they. Hey, it's their kids, Forsythe, Wattenberg. So they want to give those kids the benefit of the doubt. Okay, again, another reason why you want to tune in when we talk to Chris right around training camp. We'll have a lot more of an idea of what the deal is there with these competitions. Let's now switch over to defense. And on the defensive side, with their first pick on defense in round 3, they went with Jonah Elliss. And Jonah Elliss, if you're familiar with the name, you should be, because there are now 4 Ellis's in the NFL, all brothers. So Elliss really broke out last year in his first full season as a starter, had 12 sacks. But it looks like his best football is ahead of him. And this is a team that definitely can use a little bit of depth as far as edge rush help. I remember talking to you about it, and you told me that maybe on paper it appears that these are not household names, that maybe they have an issue, but there's a lot of good young edge rushing talent on this team, and now they add Elliss to that group. So they have to be pretty excited about the kids that they're going to be working with and growing with. And I don't know whether or not there's a star in this group, but collectively, it's a very intriguing young group.
Yeah, those young guys are Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning, Nick Benito, and they're all nice young pass rushing prospects at outside linebackers. So, but Jonah Elliss was another guy that was higher up on their board, and they figured that he was too good to pass up in the 3rd round, and probably slipped a little in the draft because he had shoulder surgery late last season, missed the final 3 games or so. But they like his potential. I mean, it remains to be seen, how fast they might bring him around. I mean, if those 3 outside linebackers who I mentioned all stay healthy, it might be tough for Elliss to get on the field a lot, but they certainly like him as a future piece.
Yeah, and they're all young and cheap especially for now. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, pass rushers, if they're pretty good, they'll start asking for a lot of money for contract extensions. So if that's the case, and they don't want to hang on to some of those guys. I mean, I think Cooper's entering his 4th year, I guess. So they got a possible replacement.
Yeah. Browning and Cooper, they're both just big contract years for them. So we'll see how it all works out. By the way, Cooper, another 7th round draft pick. Very interesting. But that was back in 2021. Okay. And then wrap it up with their second of 2 defensive draft picks, Kris Abrams-Draine from Missouri. And another kid, by the way, that has experience in returning. He's more of a kick returner. Vele, more of a punt returner. That's the experience they had in college. He's a little bit on the thin side, but this is somebody that has the ability to play in the slot. Not sure that's where they want him to play because he is, again, a little thin, but very good athlete, 4.4 speed. What do they like about him?
Well, he's another guy that, probably the biggest news surrounding him is that he's got Justin Simmons as number 31. I mean, Simmons gets released in a salary-related move after last season, a Pro Bowl player, and boom, they didn't waste any time. And I was talking to Chris, and he said, yeah, it just seemed like a good DB number. I chose it. So he put some pressure on himself already by taking number 31. And, he's a guy that could be in the mix for that other outside cornerback job. I mean, Levi Wallace is probably the leading candidate, free agent that they signed. But they haven't given up on Damari Mathis, who was the starter for the first 6 games last year till Fabian Moreau, who remains unsigned, moved into the lineup. And then they had Riley Moss, one of their draft picks last year. So there's going to be a lot of competition, one might think, for that other cornerback spot, unless it's something that Levi Wallace just steps him up immediately and proves as a veteran he's the guy.
So they definitely intend to give him a shot to play on the outside and go from there. That's why they drafted him, not to play in the slot.
Yeah, I haven't heard of anything yet of him being a slot guy. I mean, they're set at the slot with Jaquan McMillan, but there are other guys that they're wanting to take a look at who can play the slot as well. I mean, Reese Taylor, who was a practice squad player last year, is a potential guy there. And they, keep talking about Riley Moss being an outside cornerback, but there's some people that think he might be a guy who does end up in the slot. So yeah, they'll look at a lot of guys in the slot, and who knows, maybe they'll look at Kris in the slot.
Okay. A few things I want to wrap up with you about. A couple still related to the draft. I don't know. Do you give grades? Are you asked to give grades on the draft from the Gazette?
No, I didn't give a grade. I mean, if I did, it was probably like a B+ type draft, I think. I mean, it was solid, but some of their, some people thought Nix should have been more of a late first round type guy. Some people think maybe they reached on Nix. We'll find out. I mean, obviously, if he turns out to be their quarterback of the future, it was a brilliant pick. But if in 3-4 years, he's okay, but nothing great, they might say
Sure.
They reached on him, and they might be looking at all the other players that they passed over at number 12 to take him, including, Blake Bowers, the tight end. So, so we'll just have to see.
Yeah, I thought they had a very good draft myself. Matter of fact, I thought every team in the AFC West had a good draft. So I know it's not Denver fans want to hear, but I thought it was a really good draft all across the board in the West. And I do think Denver did a really good job. And especially, look, when like you said, we don't know about Nix. That's why trying to determine how a draft is graded or how we perceive the draft, we know we're not going to be able to grade it properly for a few years. But when you go and you can draft a kid that's got all the talent like Nix, and you need a starting quarterback to grow with, right there, that's a really good starting point. Okay. What positions do you think they were not able to maybe bulk up with? Do you think there is still, because you mentioned a lot of the positions we went over, you talk about competition, so that's good across the board, but is there still a position or two that you think that they need to do a little bit more work on?
Well, first of all, let me apologize for Mr. Bowers for calling him Blake Bowers, Brock Bowers, of course. So going back to offense there, but moving back to defense, George Paton, the general manager, talked at the NFL owners meetings a month before the draft about they really needed to get more athletic at inside linebacker. Well, they didn't draft anybody at that position. They signed as an undrafted free agent Lavelle Bailey, and it was kind of interesting because I did a story on him, and he told me that Sean Payton called him not once but twice during the 7th round of the draft, begging him to sign with the Broncos. So if the head coach is calling you twice in the 7th round, that seemed like that was kind of a priority. I don't know if he's the type of guy that might emerge as a rookie, but he is an athletic inside linebacker. And entering the draft, they had known as well that Drew Sanders, third-round pick last year, had suffered a torn Achilles injury, but they didn't draft an apparent replacement for him. I mean, there was plenty of talk that Sanders might move to outside linebacker, which some people said that's why they drafted Jonah Elliss, but still he was a candidate also at inside linebacker as well. So they don't have him to potentially compete, at least not until midseason. They're hopeful he can be back around the middle of the year from his injury. So competition should be interesting at inside linebacker. I'm not so sure that Vele can compete to start unless they really like him, but they did sign Cody Barton as a free agent. They've got Jonas Griffith returning after missing all of last season due to a torn ACL.
Yeah, Sanders is someone, we talked about him before, and he is he's one of those players that it was really going to depend on where he went. What scheme did he go to? What did the staff like about him, because he could play multiple positions? So it'll be interesting to see what happens to him when he gets back on the field. Okay, so inside linebacker, that's what you want to zero in on. And speaking of Bailey, are there any other free agents that they signed that we should keep an eye on?
You're talking about undrafted free agents?
Correct.
Well, I mentioned Frank Crum out of Wyoming. He was a nice signing for them. One of the more intriguing signings was a guy by the name of Thomas Yasmin, who's their international player. He doesn't count against the 90-man roster. He's a native of Australia who showed some interesting flashes during his career at Utah. So he's a guy that could have potential as a growth player down the road. We touched upon Blake Watson. That was an interesting signee, a guy that a lot of people thought would be drafted. So those are some of the more intriguing undrafted free agent signings.
Okay. Now, what I want to do is go over, because we have a couple more minutes. I want to, and since the schedule has been out a couple of weeks, talk to you a little bit about the schedule. What did you think? What were the highs and lows for Denver Bronco fans when they looked at the schedule?
Well, they're playing 3 out of their first 4 games on the road, which is the first time they've done that since 1962.
Oh,
of course, last year they played their first 2 at home, proceeded to lose both of them. So much, a lot of people thought, they're going to get off to a great 2-0 start. So you don't always know. I mean, obviously, looking at last year, they've got one thing that was kind of intriguing is they have 4 trips to the Eastern time zone. And Sean Payton said last year that they requested to the NFL to make 2 of those back-to-back because they want to stay on the East Coast and practice. But so the NFL listened to them, but only to an extent. Of those 4 games on the road in the Eastern time zone, the others being Cincinnati and Baltimore, they put them back-to-back in week 3 at Tampa and then at the New York Jets. So those are the 2 farthest. They're still 1,000 miles apart. So it's not like they're playing in Baltimore one week and the Jets the next. So they'll practice somewhere or other. I mean, I probably wouldn't make sense to stay in Florida if you're going up to New York the next week. And I guess, intriguingly, week 3 in Florida, you might recall they were in Florida for week 3 last year and proceeded to give up 70 points in a 70-20 loss to the Dolphins. So that might not be the best omen being back in Florida in week 3.
And they're playing, so the divisions, they're playing the AFC North. And what other division do they play in? South? The
NFC South.
NFC South.
The key game there is Sean Payton. It'll be on a Thursday night in October, returning to New Orleans for the first time since he departed.
There you go. Love it. There it is, right there.
Yeah, and then you got the Russell Wilson returning to Denver. That's in week 2. That'll be the Broncos home opener. You got opening at Seattle, but of course, a little different than 2 years ago when they opened at Seattle, but Russell Wilson was still around. And only one Monday night game, December 2nd against Cleveland. So that could be, if the Broncos aren't doing well, that could be flexed out. So we'll see.
All right. So there you go. That's the schedule for the Denver Broncos. Let's look at the schedule here on our show. In closing, just want to once again just let everybody know I'm going to take as much of this info, digest it, and put it in writing, and it'll be available in the 2024 Ourlads Draft Review Guide. So again, this is last year's Richardson on the cover. Not sure who will be on the cover this year. So if you have any suggestions, Bo Nix, why not? We'll see who they put on there. I don't know if they'll go the easy route and put Caleb Williams on there, but I'd like to see them be a little bit creative, like Richardson. I think that was creative last year. So that's going to be, of course, at ourlads.com. Check it out for the Ourlads Draft Review Guide. Again, Chris, we're going to talk more about the Broncos before the season does begin. So I thank you very much for doing this as usual. And you are not only, of course, doing your work for the Gazette as far as writing about the team, but as far as where can fans like catch, basically you're just doing interview podcasts, things, or do you have your own show?
No, I mean, we do podcasts that are on the Denver Gazette website, denvergazette.com. And then I can always be found at Chris Tomasson on Twitter. You see the spelling of my name there. Just put it all together, Christomasson on Twitter.
Awesome. Chris, appreciate it. I'll talk to you. I can't wait to talk to you again. That means the season will be almost here.
Sounds good. Thanks.